Hello, this is Yarrow, and welcome to another episode of the Yarrow podcast. I want to start this episode with a quick story. So, I was in Tasmania, Australia. I'm a guy in my early 20s. I'm backpacking for the first time, staying in these cheap hostels, and I'll be honest, I hated it. I was fruit picking as a way to try and make money, and I hated that. I hated picking apples and strawberries and making like $50 a day for like a 10-hour days of work. It was horrible. I hated the feeling of being broke. I had like, a few $1,000s in the bank. I hadn't ever had any success with business on some kind of significant level yet. So it was I was young, to be fair. But this is the point where I started to really realize I need to have a business and I need to have an income stream and I need to make more money and I need to be in charge of my destiny and my future. And I have this vivid memory. One story I'll share from my backpackers trip. So back then, this is prior to the internet being available on our phones. And I didn't have internet available at the hostel I was staying at. It wasn't like common to have Wi-Fi, at least not at a hostel that's like out in the farm. This was a proper rural farm hostel. So I had to walk down about a half an hour walk down the hill to the local town, to the local library, connect to the internet using their services, and I could, check my email, check any updates going on, even, check my bank balance, things like that. I remember doing this and looking at my bank balance and how small amount of money I was getting put in from this fruit picking I was doing. And I did have a little bit of income had come in from the internet by that point. So I did have the few $1,000 savings had come from these few things I was selling online. And in fact, by then I'd also started my first agency, but I was kind of haphazardly, focusing on it. It wasn't like my main business yet. It was about to become actually. Once I left Tasmania, I decided to focus on that first agency I had, and it became my first real income stream. But I remember very vividly going, okay, this is not how I want to make money. I don't want a job. I don't want a career. I don't want to have my income capped to an hourly rate. I don't want to have, my potential to grow in a company based on someone else's decision. I hated everything about that. So I had to find a way to make money. But I noticed too that, the business model you choose really dictates how well you do. So far, what I had done in business was so random. I'd make a sale here or there. I felt out of control. I didn't know when my next customer was coming from my agency. The few times I made money from other things, it was very once off. I'd sell some e-commerce type stuff on eBay. I'd make a bit of money from advertising sales on a hobby website I had, but nothing was predictable. Nothing was significant. So when I get back to my hometown of Brisbane at the time, and I actually start focusing 100% on my agency, things get better. I start making more money because I focus on it. I get more customers, but there's still a problem. It's unpredictable. A customer comes in, buys, and then they leave. And a couple of customers become regulars, but eventually they stop. They might send us 3 or 4 or 5 jobs for my agency, but then it'll be over. And I realized that I'm never going to be able to feel secure in my income until I have some sort of more reliable, regular income source. And at that time, I started to learn about internet business models. And probably like yourself, I came across this amazing idea called subscription income or recurring income. And this sounded like the answer. Oh my gosh, someone will pay me month after month for something that they will keep paying for. And I thought, this is the answer. This will be the way to feel like I'm stable each month. I know I'm going to make a certain amount of money. And it just sounds magical, to be absolutely honest. And I was actually hearing from other people who had achieved this. They had all these paying members in a membership site, or they were paying for some kind of software or service or something. So I said, I got to get on this. So fast forward, I actually exited the agency because that just wasn't going to be the answer for me. I didn't see a way to grow that business, and recurring income wasn't really an option with that business model and what I was selling. So my next business, being an education business, I got to experience recurring income. Now, it didn't turn out to be what I expected. So I have my first ever product launch. And of course, I made it a recurring product. So I was going to charge, I think it was $29 per month for access to essentially an online course, a very early version. It was based on text content, but it was an actual course. Now I thought this would be it. I can sell $29 every week. They'll get a lesson, $29 per month, and I'll just keep producing new lessons. I was a great content creator, so I could always create new lessons. So I start doing this launch. I prepare. I get my first few weeks of lessons ready. I do a whole launch campaign. I'm not going to break that down for you in this audio. If you are interested, you should definitely be on my email list. I break down my launch campaign there. And then the launch goes really well, incredibly well. 400 subscribers join my first ever product, my first ever subscription product. And after all is said and done, about $11,000 per month is dropping into my bank account from these subscribers. And I was stoked, so happy. I thought I'd done it. If I had $11,000 a month coming in from that point forward, I would finally be at the point where I felt well and truly free. I could, rent, live large, save some money, potentially buy a house. I didn't factor in taxes at the time. I perhaps was a bit naive. It's not as much money as I thought it was, but when I saw $11,000 going into my bank account every month, that was pretty cool. Unfortunately, that did not stay the situation. So within the next month, I started getting cancellations to my subscription product, and more cancellations a month after that. And because I wasn't making as many new customer sales as cancellations, I was actually dropping in income overall. I did go on to fix this problem, and I've changed my subscription business into basically a 6-month product, and then eventually it became a one-time purchase. Another story I share on my newsletter. If you're not a subscriber already, go grab that. But I realized something. So when you have a subscription product, it's not really a subscription product. It's just something that people will pay a certain amount of times for, and there will always be an average. So they call it a lifetime value. A certain number of people will keep paying for a certain number of months, and you times, the amount of months they pay for times the months gives you the lifetime value. So at $29 a month, if I had 10 months, it'll be $290, before fees. And that customers were $290 to my business. So the fact that I had to come to terms with, and I say this to you as well, if you think that subscription income, recurring income is your pathway to freedom, understand this. It is simply a payment plan for products that leads to a certain amount of money coming from that customer. It is not a never-ending stream of income. People cancel. There's this thing called churn. It's any subscription business has it. There's no way of getting around it. So it was a sobering idea and a fact to come to terms with, that what I thought was going to be my ticket out was actually just yet another good, better than anything I've had before income stream, but not a set me up forever income stream. So that kind of wraps up the story. I know I've left you on a cliffhanger a little bit, but I want to kind of connect the dots to where I'm at today with this. I learned that lesson many, many years ago. And since then I still use subscription-based pricing whenever I can, because it is one of the best pricing models. My current agency is it's a subscription high ticket service. In fact, you could say my current agency's pricing model, which starts at $2,000 per month or $19.95 per month, is the product of all my prior lessons and different business models. I was like, I want it to be recurring. I want it to be a high price. And, consequently, the lifetime value, I don't have the up-to-date numbers, but the last time we crunched these numbers, it was somewhere around $20,000 plus was the lifetime value of a customer. Fantastic. That's huge. That's a number that is meaningful. And even though it's, again, not forever income, it's a large enough number that when you get a customer, it makes a big impact, and you can also spend a lot of money in terms of marketing and advertising to get that customer. There's a lot of room. Obviously, there's delivery costs, and it's not pure profit margin, but we won't discuss that now. But it's definitely a much better business model. Now, I've also had other products and services. I sold a course for $1,000, $2,000. That wasn't recurring, but it's better to get $1,000 all up front than to get even $100 a month and have the person cancel after 4 months. There's all kinds of factors with pricing, obviously beyond the scope of this podcast. But the important thing to remember is there's no such thing as recurring income. The true value is lifetime value. But, and here's my final point for today's audio, there's another concept, another habit that you can look for or create within your customer base that I have come to realize is the final kind of piece of the puzzle. If you want to get as close to recurring forever income as you can, it's to look for this. You need to look for something that has a subscription pricing model. So again, they keep paying month after month, but the thing that they're paying for is something they can't live without. Now that is the next level. Now that is not easy to find. The not live without is a challenge. I remember, ironically, this is very, very early days. The first time I saw the I can't live without kind of subscription business model was one of the oldest internet business models ever. Web hosting. One of the first things I ever made money from online was building websites for a few, people I knew in my network, and then charging hosting. I was a reseller for a hosting service. So I paid like $50 a month, and I would then charge $20 a month to 10 clients for website hosting. And as long as they want their website to remain up, they have to keep paying a monthly fee. So that's like the original recurring subscription income. Now, you could say, yes, there's still lifetime value, and chances are that hosting might eventually be canceled. But something like a website, once you've got it up and running and it's your business's website, you're probably not going to cancel it. So since then, I've come to realize that there are several things on the internet that have the potential to become forever subscriptions. So technical services like hosting is a good example, although that is one of those services today that is so competitive. It's a hard space. I wouldn't start there. There are certain software tools that we use that once we get embedded within the use of that software and it's actually working for us, we're unlikely to cancel. Email autoresponders is the best example of that, because once you start building all your email sequences, you collect your database there. The switching costs are high. Another key point with going after this goal of forever subscription, you want to make sure switching costs are high. Otherwise, you might get a lot of people buying in, but as soon as they get an alternative that is, perhaps cheaper or better, and if the switching costs are low, they're going to switch away. So switching costs have to be high. It has to be something that is just very unlikely to cancel. And I think one of the best ways to look for this today is actually in the form of habits. What can you make a habit that delivers a direct outcome for your customer base that causes them to keep using, that tool? And you can kind of tie in all my concepts here. And today, as I record this, I'll end this audio with one example of this. I have been using Replit. You've heard me talk about this for the last few audios. Replit is a vibe coding tool that I've predominantly been using for websites, to basically design my websites. Now, it's become a habit for me, certainly in the last few months, because I've had several projects that I'm getting up and running and several marketing campaigns I've been getting up and running that require websites. And in the past, I would have had my technical person do it for me, but instead I've been using Replit and designing my own landing pages, designing my own website homepage for this new project. In fact, the Patrick website is built with Replit. And I've noticed that it's become a habit to use Replit to make any changes. You know how there's always a small change to a website. Change the copy, add a new section, maybe something's a little bit broken, doesn't look right on mobile. So I keep going back to Replit. But here's the real secret here. Replit has tied in the oldest thing I mentioned earlier, the hosting aspect of this too. So if you host your websites on Replit, that means you're designing them on Replit, you're updating them on Replit, and you're hosting them on Replit. So if your campaign is building a website that you're going to keep, modifying, keep using long term to get customers, once it starts getting customers, it's very unlikely you're going to switch away because the switching costs are high. You don't want to recreate this website. It becomes a challenge, to move it or recreate it. The price is low enough that, you're not going to find a dramatically different price for this. We're talking, 20, 30, 40, $50 a month kind of thing. Because you're hosting the website as well, you have a reason to keep paying for it, even if you're not changing it. You just want to make sure that landing page is still there collecting leads for me. So it's kind of tied in both the design component and the hosting component. And I remember talking to some friends who were building SaaS tools, and I was like, if you can host something for people that they will need to keep using over and over again, that's really critical because it creates a high switching cost reason to keep paying for something, never to cancel it, because you need to keep those assets in existence or whatever you're doing for people. In fact, that's actually why with Patrick, when I built it, I wanted to make sure that Patrick actually creates a permanent asset. It's just not creating content that people use once and forget. So Patrick builds a website, hosts your podcast, distributes your podcast. Everything is on our platform. So we're a version of a hosting service as well, plus the content repurposing, so you can share it on our more temporary places like social media feeds. So I encourage you, as an ending point here, think about looking for things that are habits that have high switching costs, high switching costs. There's a component that people, once it starts to work, will pay forever for, because that is the true subscription forever income, or the closest you can get to it. Now it's difficult. There's not many services that you can pay for that are like that. If you're providing a service, you're going to have to find something where you really embed deeply inside your clients' businesses, or whatever it is you're doing that they need to keep paying for, because if they don't, something falls apart. That's critical. If you're selling e-commerce products, physical products, those monthly things, the switching cost part of this is harder for e-commerce. You can sell toilet paper. Everyone needs that every month, but the switching cost of toilet paper is quite low. So it's more challenging. That's where, the more technically unique your product, the more difficult it will be for someone else to replicate it, or the more configuration or embedding within what you're doing that product does, the harder it is for people to switch. When it comes to software, I've already mentioned, if there's an element of the software that is required ongoing and you host that for people, that again becomes something they have to keep paying for. So this kind of applies to every business model out there, and it's a good thing to look for. I actually look back on my career, and if I had known this earlier on, if I had thought to look for things like recurring income, habit forming, high switching costs, high pricing, somewhat unique, something special about it that helps differentiate from other markets. These are all things I just didn't know about when I was building my first businesses. And it's almost like each business taught me a component of that, leading to the closest thing I could get to like the ultimate business model. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Yarrow podcast. You can find all the episodes. Just go to your favorite podcast player, look for the Yarrow, YARO podcast, and you can find my newsletter and everything to do with my coaching at insidegrowth.com. And if you want to check out the landing pages that I was talking about, one in particular, insidegrowth.com/content. You'll find the most recent landing page and a great resource I give away there on the AI tools I use for content marketing. That's insidegrowth.com/content. All right. I'll speak to you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.